I'm Sheriff Kevin Bygd of the Dunn County Sheriff's Office. My comments here today are going to be brief because I'll soon turn it over to Investigator Jason Stalker, or Sergeant Jason Stalker and Investigator Dan Wesslen. And they'll give you a few more details about their part in this investigation, and we'll also hear from representatives from Ramapo College. On February 15th, 1974, Mary Kay Schlase was found deceased in the township of Springbrook, Dunn County. Mary's death at the time was ruled a homicide. I'm happy to report that John K. Miller is in custody here in the Dunn County Jail for her murder 50 years later. I can't thank Karen and David from Ramapo College enough for their assistance in this case and for being here today. We are going to take some questions at the end. However, again, just remember that we can't get too much more into details about this case, so Mr. Miller has an opportunity to receive a fair trial here in Dunn County. Sergeant Stalker.
All right, good afternoon. I'm Sergeant Jason Stalker. I'd like to read a brief summary of our agency's investigation into Mary's case. As stated at last week's press conference, Mary's homicide case has been an open and ongoing investigation for the past 50 years. There have been multiple investigators from both the Dunn County Sheriff's Office and agencies that have devoted time throughout their careers to this investigation. I think I speak for everyone involved when I say thank you for not giving up on this case and not letting it become lost to time. If you've worked for this agency for any amount of time, you knew about Mary Schlase and her case. It is a very well-known case within our agency and was commonly a topic of discussion, even after all of these years. To summarize, on February 15th, 1974, Mary Schlase was found deceased on the side of a rural Dunn County road in Springbrook Township. Mary was found with multiple stab wounds, and her death was ruled a homicide. Early in the investigation, investigators had an eyewitness statement providing a suspect description and vehicle description. One piece of evidence found at the crime scene was a stocking hat. Investigators at that time knew the hat would be important to the investigation, but probably not in the way we were able to utilize evidence from this hat nearly 50 years later. Prior to DNA technology, the stocking hat was only able to be utilized for human hair comparisons. Multiple leads, tips, interviews, and hair comparisons were done over the course of the next several decades. However, no viable suspects were identified. As DNA technology advanced, there was eventually a partial male profile developed from the scrapings from this stocking cap. That profile was entered into CODIS, otherwise known as the Combined DNA Index System, and there were no matches. This meant our suspect's DNA was never entered into the system, and his identity would remain a mystery for now. Investigators from our agency even went to the extent of exhuming Mary to try and obtain new evidence and develop new leads. In recent years, investigative genetic genealogy has been utilized by agencies all over the United States to help solve cold cases. Dunn County Sheriff's Office investigators turned to Ramapo College and their team of genetic genealogists for assistance in developing new leads for this investigation using the partial male profile developed years earlier. Through their work, a family lineage was identified and new leads were developed. I'll let Investigator Wesslen speak more on the process of working through those leads developed by Ramapo College and their team, and how we eventually were able to bring a resolution and closure to Mary and her family even after 50 years.
Thank you. So in early 2021, we began conversation with Bygd Technology, who ultimately assisted in an attempt to extract DNA profile from hairs recovered from a crime scene, or from the crime scene. The results of that test were not enough to identify a viable suspect at that time. In the fall of 2022, we began conversations with Ramapo College regarding investigative genetic genealogy. In March of 2023, with the assistance of the Wisconsin State Crime Lab, we partnered with Ramapo College and began working closely with Karen Binder and her team. Towards the fall of 2023, a family line was identified as possibly being related to the contributor of the DNA profile developed from the homicide scene. In January of 2024, an investigation began into an individual with a possible relation to the suspect in this case. In May of 2024, we interviewed this person at their home in the state of Wyoming. With the direct assistance of Binder and her team, it was determined that this individual was not the contributor of the DNA that was recovered from the crime scene. Binder later advised us that a man living in the state of Michigan, who was the first cousin to the man in Wyoming, may be the contributor to the crime scene. Subsequently, we interviewed this man at his home in Michigan, and through his cooperation with providing a DNA sample, it was later determined that he was not the contributor. This exhausted any known male family members in this family lineage, which led to the hypothesis of an adoption in this known family line. On October 19th, 2024, we spoke again with Binder, who referenced a person to contact found after doing further IgG investigative work. We then spoke with another individual who agreed to utilize their genetic profile to assist in furthering this investigation. As a result of this, John Miller was found to be the contributor through IgG of the DNA collected from the crime scene. An interesting part about this date, which was November 4th of 2024, also would have been Mary's 76th birthday. On November 7th, 2024, we interviewed John Miller at his home, where he subsequently confirmed his involvement in the death of Mary Schleiss. Upon conclusion of interviewing John Miller, he did inform us that as soon as he had opened the door, he knew why we were there. So for further information about IgG, I want to introduce Karen Binder and David Gurney.
Good afternoon. I'm glad to have the opportunity to give these remarks about the use of investigative genetic genealogy in this case. I want to start by acknowledging the victim in this case, Mary Schleiss, and her family, some of whom are present here today. I also want to recognize the Dunn County Sheriff's Office and thank them for allowing us to help with this case. It's their tenacity and the work of countless investigators over the years, which is why everyone is here today. They never gave up seeking justice for Mary. Investigative genetic genealogy, or IgG, uses genetic and genealogical information to reverse engineer a family tree from an unknown individual's DNA. Our work begins once a genetic profile developed from a biological sample has been uploaded to two consumer genetic genealogy databases, Family Tree DNA and GEDmatch Pro. On those two sites, users who took consumer DNA tests to find out more about their heritage or discover new relatives have the option to also allow their profiles to be compared to profiles uploaded by law enforcement. When a profile is uploaded by law enforcement, we, the investigative genetic genealogists working on the case, can see how much DNA users on those sites who have agreed to participate in IgG share with the subject, which is how we refer to the person who we are trying to identify. Using traditional genealogy techniques, which consists of searching through a variety of public records, such as census data, we build up the family tree to identify common ancestors. From there, we descend the tree using the same kinds of publicly available records and tools until we find the place where the subject may fit into the family tree. And there may be more than one location where the subject could fit into the tree, which is why IgG only generates a hypothesis. It's a lead that we turn over to law enforcement, like someone calling into a tip line. It's then up to law enforcement to go out and confirm or refute that lead using more targeted DNA comparisons. Ultimately, IgG is another tool to help achieve justice. It's certainly the most powerful tool that's been developed since DNA came on the scene in the late 1980s, but it doesn't operate on its own. It requires specialized DNA labs to first generate the genetic profile, and that then depends on law enforcement to confirm the lead and decide whether to make an arrest. It's a tool. Let me just say a few words about Ramapo College, our IgG center. We opened our doors in 2022 with the goal of providing pro bono IgG services and much needed IgG education for this rapidly growing field. We provide IgG services wherever they are needed, and we have trained over 150 individuals to do this important work professionally and ethically. Let me end by saying that IGG relies on members of the public taking consumer genetic genealogy tests and uploading to Family Tree DNA or GEDmatch Pro and agreeing to participate in IGG searching. Without the public, IGG simply would not work. But with the public support, IGG can help achieve justice in crimes from 50 years ago and bring justice to people like Mary Schlace, and it can help resolve crimes committed in the present. So for people out there who haven't taken a DNA test, please consider doing so. It could be your profile that helps bring justice to another victim. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. It was a rewarding experience to work this case. It was a rewarding experience to work this case in collaboration with Dunn County Sheriff's Department. It was a rewarding experience to work this case in collaboration with the Dunn County Sheriff's Office, particularly with Investigator Dan Wesslen and Sergeant Bowling, who never gave up in pursuit of justice for Mary. It should be known, as you may have heard from the comments of the other speakers before me, that it takes a village to solve a case like this. To that end, we have a number of people to thank. The laboratory, Intermountain Forensics, who provided advanced DNA testing and bioinformatics services for this case, Family Tree DNA and GEDmatch Pro for the use of their databases, the DNA relatives in those databases who made their profiles available for IGG searching and who cooperated with this investigation, our case manager and our volunteer researchers at Ramapo College IGG Center, and finally, our donors and supporters who made this work possible at Ramapo College. Also, the investigating agencies in Minnesota and Wisconsin who never gave up on this case. The family tree research in this case was very complicated, and it took over a year for our investigative genetic genealogy research to bear fruit. The patience, skill, cautiousness, and dedication of each person who had a hand in investigating this case is unmatched. And while there's still more to be done to bring Mary's case to justice, we're thrilled that IGG has advanced the investigation after more than 50 years. Thank you.
I just wanted to take a moment just to put out a thank you to everybody. Some of it is repetitive, but I'd like to say that although this case is very old, at this agency it's never collected dust. As mentioned before, many great investigators from this sheriff's office and other agencies have worked tirelessly on the case to ensure its successful conclusion. I also want to thank the individuals who shared a genetic relationship with John Miller. Throughout this investigation, as previously mentioned, we traveled to Wyoming, Minnesota, and Michigan following leads and were continuously welcomed into each of their homes. Lastly, I want to thank Bygd Technologies, Intermountain Labs, and most importantly, Ramapo College, specifically Karen Binder, Professor David Gurney, and their team, as without their willingness to assist us with this investigation, this closure could not have been possible. Lastly, we have talked a lot about the facts of this investigation, those involved, and what it took to resolve this case. But we don't want to forget that this is about justice for Mary and bringing her family closure. Mary can be remembered as an accomplished artist, equestrian, sister, aunt, and daughter. Thank you.
Be happy to, I'll keep this crew up here and happy to answer any questions.
The first question, how long ago was the sample uploaded that ultimately led to this person? And the follow-up, how distant of a relative was this person to John Miller? Obviously, I don't need person's identity, but any sense on that, guys?
Can you ask the first part of the question again?
How long ago was that sample uploaded to a database?
That was
You might step to the mic, please.
The sample was uploaded in spring of 2023, and at first, the closest genetic relative was in the range of between a first to second cousin. Many of the relationships ended up being half relationships because of the adoption situation.
So did the cousins in Wyoming and Michigan know that they had an adopted relative in that age range? And can you explain what got you from those people to the daughter who was able to get you closer?
My understanding is that they were not aware of having an unknown relative. And it would take a long time to explain how we got from one place to another, but I would just say that everything that we do has to do with public records and our findings on the internet. And so we were able to find, with cooperation from some of the cousins of John Miller, the DNA cousins of John Miller, we were able to figure out who the unknown relative was.
So just to, I don't want to make you explain the whole thing, but just so I'm understanding, like you're talking two different families here. Did you kind of see that these were two unrelated families, but they had the same DNA strands?
Right.
And so then you came up with the hypothesis of the adoption?
Yes.
Can you just kind of put that into words for me?
Yes. So through DNA and cooperation from some of John K. Miller's biological DNA relatives, we were able to piece together which family the unknown child, who turned out to be John K. Miller, might belong to.
So at that point, again, once you hit that, okay, this adoption theory, now what are you looking for? Since these people didn't know they had an adopted relative, what were you looking for to try to lead to that person, since it was unknown to the family you'd identified?
Well, I don't want to give too much information about the genealogy, since it may come up later. But there are certain things that you see when people are building their family trees. If they don't know who their relatives are, then that can be apparent in their family tree. So
Adoption records?
we never have access to adoption records unless the state were, in this case that did not come up. We don't have any access to adoption records.
Can you explain, at the college, are these like, is this like a class and students are working there? Can you kind of give an overview of what the college does and how they get cases, how many you do, and what's the difference between that and like Parabon Nanolabs is like a well-known for-profit place?
Yeah, just to answer the last part first, we are a nonprofit institution. Ramapo College is one of the state colleges in New Jersey. The IGG Center started in 2022 with the goal of providing pro bono IGG services to agencies all around the country. So we do all of our work for free for the benefit of the agencies and the victims in these cases. We get cases from law enforcement, from medical examiners, from agencies all over the country. And when we started out our program, we did some outreach to agencies, specifically in regions that either Karen or myself have a connection to. And here, I'm from Minnesota, so we reached out to some agencies in Wisconsin and Minnesota. We have different ways of approaching different kinds of cases. For criminal cases like this, all of the work is done in-house by our small team of staff. And for other cases like unidentified human remains, we have volunteers who have taken our certificate program who we bring in to help with those cases.
What is the hit rate, or how often are you able to come to a conclusion like this? Do you have a percentage of any kind? Or?
It's hard to say a hit rate when you're talking about IGG because depending on the complexity of the case, how close the matches are, whether there is adoption in the family tree, a case can be solved in an hour, or it can take thousands and thousands of hours and many years. So we have many cases that we have been able to provide a lead in so far in our 2 years of existence. We also have many cases that are ongoing because we continue to work on the family tree, looking for the kinds of clues that helped bring resolution in this case.
So how many have you done and how many are solved?
We have provided leads in 17 cases at this point.
And then how many are you working on in general?
We have over 40 that are in the lab pipeline somewhere, but 70.
It's hard to say because cases come into us. When they come in, there's a process of speaking to the investigating agency, getting everyone on board, making sure the sample can be found, and then it has to be shipped to a lab. The lab has to generate that profile, which depending on the sample that's provided can, again, take anywhere from a couple of weeks to a couple of months. And then at that point it has to be uploaded to the databases. Sometimes we use only one of those databases. If we don't get what we're looking for, we might rely on the other one. So I'd say total we have about 75 cases at various stages of examination.
You provided 17 leads in 2 years, would that be accurate?
Yes,
Okay.
2 years.
What's your reaction to, you know, charges being brought in this case based off of the work you did and the investigation that followed it?
I mean, I think my primary reaction is just happiness that there will hopefully be justice for Mary in this case. I do want to emphasize, though, again, that IGG is only a lead. It's ultimately the work of the investigators following up on that lead, confirming it. That is what will bring justice in this case.
Going back to what I asked at the beginning, when that hit came in spring of 23, like, does your computer like send off a signal like, hey, look, we got a match? Just tell me the reaction when that uploaded. How did you guys find out about it? And just like, okay, we're onto something here. Just tell us about that moment.
Yeah, so initially in the spring of 2023, that initial DNA match of between a first and second cousin that would have been considered to be very, I'm sure I sent an email to Investigator Wesslen probably saying, this looks like a highly solvable case because you only have to build the family tree back of that person a few generations to figure out what their relationship is to the subject profile that we're researching. However, of course, that ended up being complicated by the adoption. So initially, I'm sure I said it's highly solvable, and then and it still was solvable, but with a couple of hurdles along the way.
So it seems that John Keith Miller's DNA was not like in the system, so to speak.
Right.
Where has he been this whole time? Has he just been local in Minnesota across the border, or how difficult would he be to find?
He's, to our knowledge, he's been in the Minnesota area most of his life. Grew up in Minnesota, lived in the Minnesota, area from north of the Twin Cities to in the Twin Cities to south of the Twin Cities most of his life.
But he wasn't in the system. He wasn't a criminal felon.
He was not loaded in the system. He could have been involved in something prior to collection of DNA. The man's 83, 84 years old, so he could have been involved in, in stuff prior to mandatory collection of DNA on felony charges. We'll take a couple more questions, Marie, any online? All right. Then we'll wrap it up.
How recently was it then that the technology advanced to the point where you could get DNA from the stocking cap? Was this just 20 years ago, 3 years ago?
Yeah, in the last 3 to 4 years, Dan, do you want to talk a little bit more about the hair fiber and
Sure.
how that was established?
So the DNA profile that was generated many years ago. That was the profile that was worked on when the new technology with IGG became a standard that we could start working with other people on. And that would have been May of 2023.
So there was DNA from the hair.
It was recovered from scrapings on a hat.
And how many years ago was that developed? And I guess I'm trying to figure out where the...
Right. I can't give an exact date. Around 2008-ish.
Okay. Did the exhuming the body lead to more DNA, or is it all the hat?
Well, we're continuing to investigate other portions of this entire case. So I'll leave it at that for now.
The difference is that with the hat, like at first you're using it to find convicted criminals, but then with this new technique, you're able to search for people that potentially have never been charged with a crime through family trees and whatnot. Is that accurate?
I would say that's accurate.
Do you have other cases this gives you hope for that you've been looking into or wanted to have this technology available for? Is there anything else out there right now?
Well, and there's other things that we do want to look at. Whether this will become handy in those situations is yet to be found out.
Just another quick follow-up for Karen. So the people from Wyoming and Michigan, like, can you give a sense, like, were they 85, 90% matches? Clearly they weren't the person, but how close, like, as you interviewed them, how confident were you, like, we're on the right track, we're on the right family? Like, how close was that connection, that DNA match?
I don't want to give specifics about that because of the ongoing investigation, but they were close enough family members that it was easy to predict their projected relationship to the suspect profile.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, guys.